Hello, welcome to day number 10 of the Bible in a Year. I'm Father Mark speaking to my parishioners about Genesis chapter 20 to 21, the story of Abraham, which, of course, as we've heard, is our story. And he's married to Sarah, and so we can also say that Sarah is our story. Marriage, as I studied marriage and family life in seminary, and marriage is something that makes two people one and become one flesh in a marvelous way. Nothing makes you more united than being united in marriage, a marriage bond. And in this story, we hear about Sarah and Abraham, and they both have their faults, but sometimes it might seem in the text that Sarah was kind of more mean, or that she was she didn't like Hagar, and that she was jealous somehow of and so but I think it's important to see that both of them together were not perfect, as they had their faults, and the patriarchs were not perfect. A married couple again is they become so united. So many times I've seen among parishioners, but also among families, and in my own family, that a husband and wife, after years of marriage, they just become kind of like one another in a certain way. So many times the one will take on the maybe the bad habits of the other, or the good habits maybe, or take on the political party of the other, or join the religion of the other. And it just makes it easier to live together when you kind of start to agree and to go along with one another. And anyway, it could be for the good or for the bad, and I just think that's important to keep in mind, and to not look at these passages and see that it looks like Sarah was the bad guy, or Sarah was kind of not. They both as a couple made these decisions and packed Hagar off to the desert. Poor Hagar. Something similar we saw in the story of Adam and Eve, where it seems like Eve was the one who tempted Adam, or listened to the serpent, and kind of made the bad decision. But Adam was not doing his job of keeping and protecting the garden either. He was quiet. He didn't say anything. So that's a fault in itself. And so both of them were at fault. So you can't interpret these passages. For example, in Genesis chapter 3:17, it says that Adam was reprimanded by God. God says, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree." That makes it sound like, it was her, tempting him. But he gave in to the temptation, of course. But the point here is that we have to listen to God. You don't just listen to your spouse or your friends or your peers or peer pressure. You have to look to God's will and not human respect. You have to respect God and go by God and the commandments, not by what. Anyway, so something similar happens here in Genesis. In chapter 16, it said that Abraham too. It said Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. Chapter 16, verse 2. And so this is kind of a refrain. It's kind of, you don't listen to your wife. But it doesn't exactly mean don't listen to your wife. Not that wives are bad, but don't listen to human, to the creatures, but to the Creator rather, and to the, He's created us. We have to go by His rule book or His instruction manual. We have to go by the commandments, not by our own, conniving with our spouses or friends or family or gang, our own persons. Well, no, So anyway, couples think together, but we have to think, thinking like God instead. So Abraham and Sarah were not perfect, and in fact they have faults, and it seems almost like this Abimelech character is he's a foreign king, but he seems to be very upright and even more sensible than Abraham himself, and he seems to be a righteous person. But Abraham and Sarah, they don't always seem to be perfect. Maybe because this is the story of Abraham and Sarah, and it's our story, and we're showing the faults and the blemishes of our family, the family laundry we're seeing. But in any case, so now we have this famous story, and it seems like a terrible story, of course, that finally Sarah gets to laugh because God has the last laugh, and she bears a son at the age of 90, whose name they give Isaac, which means laughter. And so here we have Sarah having this blessing, and yet, just like us, sometimes we get great blessings, but then we sort of take it for granted, and we're not grateful. We don't thank God every day. We don't pray to God every day, maybe, and we start to kind of get maybe jealous of others. And here we have Sarah sees her son Isaac playing with Ishmael, and she gets jealous again and thinks that she wants to protect maybe her interests, and so she wants to get rid of this other son, this son of the slave girl Hagar, and she says those words, terrible words it seems like, "Cast out this slave woman with her son." And so Abraham eventually reluctantly, but then he goes along with her. He packs a lunch and some water and sends them out into the wilderness and the desert. And it says that she went out, and when the water was gone, Hagar cast the child under one of the bushes. Now, that is called exposing a baby. In the Old Testament times and ancient times, if you wanted to get rid of a baby, you would maybe have the baby, and then you would put this baby on a rock in the sun for a while. And that was a terrible thing. Of course, abandoning, or it's the form of abortion that has always existed, unfortunately, and it's always been something evil, according to the Bible. So here, an angel or the Lord speaks to Hagar and reassures her and eventually saves her and the child from dying in the desert. Now, it's very important to realize that there's good news here, because in the New Testament, in the book of Galatians, St. Paul writes to the Galatians in chapter 4, verse 21 and following, that there's good news for us Christians, because we are like Sarah and Isaac. We're not like Hagar. And so what does this mean? What does this this kind of story or representation, this symbolism mean? It doesn't mean that we are like Sarah because we are from the Jewish people. Obviously, we are Gentiles. We're from other nations. It doesn't mean that we're like Hagar because we're from Arabia. Hagar was a descendant of Esau, who was she's associated with that. So she's associated with people who are not, people of the covenant. Hagar was a housekeeper. She was a slave woman. But those aren't exactly the reason. The reason that we are not Hagar is because we live in the New Testament times. We live in the times of the church. And we have baptism and the sacraments, and we get this free gift, the promise. We are children of the promise. We get salvation because of God's grace and God's gift to us. And we are not according to the law. We're not under the law, kind of slaves to the law, and to especially the law of circumcision. St. Paul was pointing this out because the whole point of this story, according to St. Paul, is that Ishmael was also circumcised. That circumcision, isn't sufficient. It's not enough. This is St. Paul's saying this whole story is a parable. It's a image. It's a illustration of the fact that circumcision is not enough. We are like Isaac, and we get the salvation not because we're circumcised, but because we are children of the promise and not of the law. So the story of Abraham and Sarah is our story. God promises things to us, gives things to us, even though we're unfaithful and we have foibles and imperfections. But so this is our story, that we nevertheless are going to be free and fruitful. How about that? I like those words, free and fruitful. Sarah is going to be fruitful, and she is a free woman. And so St. Paul sees this as a symbol of how we are. We can just trust God that we will be fruitful, and we don't have to, do things our way, but just allow God to give us his blessings and freedom and make us fruitful. And it's good news because our infidelity, again, does not qualify us. This is the good news, that the story of these patriarchs who were not perfect is our story. That we're not perfect, but we just can go to confession and we can receive the graces again. We're forgiven by baptism, confession. We're incorporated into the family by the Holy Eucharist, of course, as well, becoming one body with God, children of the Father.